She didn't say goodbye. That's the part that still gets me even now. I was 63 years old, retired 2 years from the post office, and I thought the hardest thing I'd ever face was my knee surgery. I was wrong about a lot of things that year. My wife and I had been married 31 years. We met at a church picnic in Knoxville when I was 29 and she was 26, and I thought she was the most put-together woman I'd ever seen. She had this way of laughing with her whole body. You couldn't help but watch her. I fell in love with her the afternoon she argued with my uncle about the best route to Gatlinburg and refused to back down even when he pulled out a map. That was her, stubborn, smart, sure of herself. We built a life, nothing fancy, a 3-bedroom house in a quiet part of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. 2 kids, our son, who lived up in Cincinnati with his family, and our daughter, who was closer, maybe 40 minutes away in Nashville. I coached Little League for 11 years. She ran the church women's group and made the best peach cobbler in Rutherford County, and she knew it. We weren't rich. We weren't struggling. We were steady, and I thought steady was everything. The first sign was the phone. I don't know when it started exactly. Somewhere in the spring before everything fell apart, she started keeping it face down on the kitchen counter. Always. She'd done it once or twice before, said the screen distracted her while she was cooking, but this became constant, face down, everywhere, counter, nightstand, bathroom. I noticed and I told myself I was being paranoid. We were in our 60s, for God's sake. This stuff didn't happen to people like us. Then came the evening she'd step outside to take a call, said it was her sister. Her sister lives in Asheville, and they're close, so I didn't question it. Not the first time, not the second. By the 5th time in 2 weeks, I started to feel something cold sitting in my chest, but I pushed it down. I was good at pushing things down. She started losing weight. Not a lot, but I noticed. New clothes appeared in the closet, things she wouldn't have bought before. A blouse I'd never seen her wear to anywhere she told me she was going. I asked about it once. She said she got it on clearance at Kohl's, that she needed something nice for her friend's birthday dinner. I said okay. That was the end of it. Looking back, I wasn't blind. I just didn't want to see. In August, about 6 weeks before everything changed, she started getting up early. 4:30 in the morning sometimes. I'd wake up and her side of the bed was empty. I'd find her in the kitchen with her phone, and when I walked in, she'd put it down fast. She said she couldn't sleep. She said she was going through something, the change, she called it, and that she needed me to give her some space. I was her husband. I gave her space. I wish now I'd ask one more question. Just one. The Saturday morning it happened, she told me she needed the weekend alone. Said she was overwhelmed, that she needed quiet, that she loved me, but that she just needed 2 days to herself in the house. She said she was going to call her sister and rest and not think about anything hard. She looked at me when she said it. Right at me. And she seemed so tired that I believed her. I packed her bag, just one bag, a small duffel, and I drove over to my buddy Eugene's house. He lives about 20 minutes away, and he's been my friend since we were in our 30s. The kind of friend who doesn't ask too many questions. I told him I needed a place to crash for a couple nights. He set me up in his spare room and we watched the Braves game, and I thought I was doing the right thing by giving her what she asked for. I fell asleep around 10 that night with the ceiling fan on. My phone rang at 2:17 in the morning. I know the time because I still have the call in my phone history. I've looked at it more times than I should admit. It was my neighbor from 2 doors down, a man I'd known for 9 years, a decent man, the kind who waves when you pull in the driveway and brings in your garbage cans if you forget. He was barely coherent. His voice was shaking so bad I thought something had happened to him. I told him to slow down. He said my name twice like he couldn't figure out how to get to the next part. Then he said, "There are police at your house, a lot of them. You need to come home." I didn't understand. I sat up in Eugene's spare room in the dark, and I said, "What do you mean police?" He said, "I mean squad cars." An ambulance. They've had the lights going for an hour. I didn't want to call, but I thought you should know. I was dressed before I hung up. Eugene was awake by then. He'd heard me moving around, and I told him something was wrong at the house. He offered to drive. I told him to stay. I drove myself the 20 minutes home, and I don't remember any of it. I remember pulling onto my street and seeing the lights before I even made the turn. Red and blue bouncing off every house on the block. 3 squad cars. An ambulance, just like my neighbors said. A van I didn't recognize. I parked half on the curb. I don't even remember stopping the car. There was a young officer at the edge of my driveway. Couldn't have been more than 25. He put his hand up before I'd taken 10 steps. I told him this was my house. He asked me for ID. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my wallet on the driveway and had to pick it up. He looked at my license and then he said, "Sir, can you wait here a moment?" And he turned and spoke into his radio. That's when I saw the crime scene tape across my own front door, yellow, stretched from the porch post to the bush I'd planted the year we moved in. I stood there in the dark in my neighbor's street looking at that tape on my own house, and something in me just went completely quiet, like every sound dropped away. A detective came out after a few minutes. A woman, maybe 50, calm but serious. She introduced herself and she said there had been an incident at my residence. She said my wife was alive and had been transported. She said there was also another individual, and she said it in a way that told me that person had not been transported anywhere good. I said, "What individual?" She said, "Sir, I think we should talk inside my vehicle." I sat in the front seat of her car for an hour and a half. I don't know how else to describe what she told me except to say that everything I'd been telling myself for 6 months wasn't true. My wife had been having an affair. The man, I'll call him what the detective called him, which was the other party, had come to my house that night. He and my wife had argued. The argument had gotten physical. At some point, he had produced a weapon. My wife had shot him with my own gun, the .357 I kept in the lockbox in the bedroom closet, the one I'd had for 20 years and never fired outside of a range. He died in my living room. She was taken to the hospital for treatment of injuries and then taken to the police station. She had a bruised eye and a cut on her forearm. She was alive. She had shot a man in my house while I was 20 minutes away watching baseball and thinking I was being a good husband by giving her space. The detective asked me a lot of questions. I tried to answer them. At some point, Eugene showed up. My neighbor must have called him, and Eugene sat in the back seat while I talked to her. At one point, she asked if I owned a firearm, and I said yes, and I described the box and where it was, and she wrote it down. Eugene leaned forward and put his hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "Don't say anything else without talking to a lawyer." I stopped talking. That was the right call, and I know it now. I didn't know it then. I just knew I had nothing to hide, but Eugene's been around long enough to know that doesn't matter. My daughter drove down from Nashville at 3 in the morning. She must have gotten 65 miles an hour the whole way because she was there before I expected. She didn't say anything when she got out of the car, just walked straight to me and held on. She's 34 years old and she smelled like the same shampoo she's used since she was a teenager, and I just stood there in my own driveway holding my daughter while the police finished their work inside my house. My son flew in from Cincinnati 2 days later. I stayed at Eugene's for a week. I couldn't go back into that house. My daughter arranged for a cleaning service, the kind that handles situations like this, and she took care of all of it without asking me to be involved. I don't know how much it cost, and I've never asked. Some things you let your children carry because they need to feel like they're doing something, and there's nothing else you can give them. My wife was charged with second-degree murder. Her attorney argued self-defense from the beginning. The man she'd been seeing had a history. I learned this through the trial, not from her, that included a protective order filed by a previous girlfriend and a misdemeanor domestic charge that had been reduced and eventually dismissed. The prosecutor argued she had known him for nearly 2 years, that she had invited him, and that the circumstances of the shooting were inconsistent with the position of the body. The trial lasted 9 days. I sat in that courtroom for most of it. I don't know why. My son told me I didn't have to be there. My daughter told me the same thing. Eugene offered to drive me anywhere else on earth. But I went. I sat in the gallery, and I watched my wife of 31 years sit at a defendant's table and listen to people describe what happened in our living room, and I tried to understand what I was looking at. She never turned around to look at me, not once, not in 9 days. The jury deliberated for a day and a half. They came back with a conviction. Second-degree murder, not manslaughter, not self-defense. The judge sentenced her to 15 years. With time served and eligibility for parole, the attorney told me she could petition the board after serving 9 years. 9 years. She would be in her early 70s when she first became eligible. I drove home from the courthouse alone. My daughter had offered to come, but I told her I needed to do it myself. I pulled into my driveway and I sat in the car for maybe 20 minutes before I went inside. The house was clean. Everything looked the same as it always had. The dish towel hanging from the oven handle, the picture of the kids from the Christmas we all went to Gatlinburg, the same place my uncle had argued about. The cobbler dish on the counter, clean and empty like it was waiting. I went to bed at 7 o'clock and I stayed there until noon the next day. The months after that, I don't talk about much. I'll say this, I was not okay. I thought I would be able to just rebuild and move forward, and people told me I would. Good people who meant it. But grief is not a straight line, and losing someone who's still alive is its own particular kind of difficult. I wasn't mourning her death. I was mourning 31 years of a story that turned out to have a version I'd never been allowed to read. My son called every Sunday. He's steady like I used to think I was. His wife is kind, and she never once said anything that made me feel judged, and I appreciated that more than I ever told her. My daughter drove down most weekends for the first 4 months. She'd bring groceries, and we'd sit on the back porch, and sometimes we'd talk, and sometimes we just sat. She never pushed me to feel anything different than what I felt. That's a gift not everybody has. I sold the house 14 months after the trial. It was the right thing. I bought a smaller place, a ranch house about 10 miles east, with a yard that didn't need much work and a porch I could sit on in the evening. Eugene helped me move. It took most of a Saturday, and we ate sandwiches out of a cooler at noon and didn't say much, and that was fine. I started going to a men's group at my church on Tuesday nights. It wasn't therapy, exactly. Just men sitting in a circle in the fellowship hall talking about whatever they were carrying. I didn't say much the first 2 months. Then one night, a man about my age talked about how he'd spent 40 years trying to be someone his wife wanted him to be, and he still didn't know if he'd succeeded, and something in me just broke open. I talked for almost 20 minutes. I don't remember everything I said. But the room was quiet and nobody tried to fix anything. And when I was done, someone just said, yeah. And that was enough. 4 years after the trial, I got a letter from the Department of Corrections. My wife was requesting my contact information as part of a victim notification process. She had submitted a request to add me to her approved correspondence list. She wanted to write to me. I held that letter for a long time. I sat with it on my new porch, the one I'd bought after the house sold, and I read it 3 times. There was a form I could sign to decline contact. There was also a form I could sign to permit it. My daughter said it was entirely my decision, and she meant it. My son said to trust my gut. Eugene said, whatever you decide, I'll drive you anywhere you need to go after. I thought about the woman I met at that church picnic in Knoxville when I was 29. I thought about her arguing about the route to Gatlinburg. I thought about 31 years of Sunday mornings and the smell of coffee and her voice reading to the grandkids when they visited. I thought about a yellow crime scene tape stretched across my front door at 2:30 in the morning. I thought about the man in my Tuesday night group who said he still didn't know if he'd succeeded. I put the forms on my kitchen table and I left them there for 11 days. I'd walk by them in the morning and I'd walk by them at night. I wasn't ready to decide. I knew I would be eventually. I also knew that deciding too fast in either direction would mean I was doing it for the wrong reasons. On the 12th day, I picked up the forms. I sat down at the table. I made a cup of coffee first, the kind she used to make. 1.5 spoons of grounds per cup, she always said. Not 2. I don't know why I made it that way. I just did. Then I picked up a pen. I'm not going to tell you which box I checked. Some things belong to me. What I will tell you is that when I put that pen down, I didn't feel relieved exactly. I didn't feel relieved. I felt like a man who had made a choice that was the truest thing he could do with the time and the hurt and the understanding he had available to him on that particular morning. I drank the coffee. It was good. I put the form in the envelope. I sealed it. I set it by the door so I'd take it to the mailbox on my way to the Tuesday night group. And then I washed the cobbler dish that had been sitting in my cabinet, clean and untouched, since the day I moved into this house. I dried it. I put it on the shelf. I don't know yet what I'll do with it, but I'm not ready to get rid of it, and I'm not sure that's a weakness anymore. I've thought a lot about what kind of man I was during those years when something was clearly wrong, and I kept choosing not to look. That's the part nobody talks about after something like this. Everyone focuses on what the other person did, and what she did was real. I'm not minimizing it, but I've had to sit with my own part in it. Not guilt, exactly, more like honesty. I told myself I was being a good husband by giving her space. Maybe. But I also think some part of me was afraid of what I'd find if I pushed. And fear, dressed up as patience, is still fear. Knowing the difference between the two, that's something I had to learn the hard way. At 63 years old, standing in my own driveway at 2:30 in the morning, what I know now is that real clarity takes courage. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind where you sit across from a hard truth and you don't flinch away from it. Eugene had it that night in the car when he put his hand on my shoulder and told me to stop talking. My daughter had it every weekend she drove down without being asked, without making it about herself. I didn't have it for a long time. I was too busy being comfortable. There's a version of this story where I'm the victim and that's the whole story. For a while, that's the version I told myself. It was easier. But the longer I sat with it, in that spare room, in that smaller house, in that circle of men on Tuesday nights, the more I understood that the choices we make when things are uncomfortable are the ones that actually define us. I chose comfort. She chose something else entirely. Both choices had consequences that neither of us fully anticipated. I don't say that to excuse what happened. A man died in my living room. My children lost their mother to a prison sentence. That's real damage, and it ripples. But I think about the people who helped me hold myself together through it. Eugene, my daughter, driving through the dark at 3 in the morning. The man in that Tuesday group who spoke first and made it possible for me to speak. And what they all had in common was that they didn't fall apart when things got hard. They stayed. They showed up. They kept going. That's not a small thing. That's maybe the most important thing. I'm 67 now. I wake up in my ranch house and I make my coffee 1.5 spoons per cup the way she taught me, and I sit on the porch and I watch the yard. I've learned to live inside uncertainty. I don't know if I made the right choice with that form. I don't know if I'll ever know. What I do know is that I made it honestly, with everything I had available to me that morning. And I think that's what you can ask of yourself. Not perfection, not the right answer, just honesty and the willingness to keep standing up after the thing that knocked you down. The cobbler dish is still on the shelf. I bought peaches last week. I haven't decided yet, but I'm still here. And some mornings that's enough.